I woke up the morning they came because the dogs told me. Not barking. My dogs hadn't barked in over a year. They did something else now. A low, wet vibration in the chest, almost like purring, but with a rhythm that didn't match breathing. I'd stopped questioning it around month 6. By month 14, I'd started understanding what the different rhythms meant. 3 short pulses, then a long one. That meant people, coming from the South Road. I put on coffee. Real coffee. I still had 40 pounds of it vacuum-sealed in the basement. Part of the supply run I'd made to Winnemucca 18 months ago, the last time I'd crossed the perimeter. I set out 3 mugs, because the dog's rhythm told me 3, and the dogs hadn't been wrong yet. Then I sat on the porch with my 30-06 across my knees, not because I intended to use it, but because a woman, alone in 200 miles of nothing, should look like she's thought about it. They came in a white government, suburban, with plates I couldn't read through the dust. 2 men and a woman. The woman was driving. They stopped about 80 feet from the porch, which told me someone had briefed them that there might be a hostile local, and they sat in the vehicle for a full 2 minutes with the engine running before the woman stepped out. She was maybe 35, fit, had that particular federal posture, shoulders set like someone trained her to stand in a doorway and fill it. She wore a dosimeter clipped to her jacket, which almost made me laugh. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Erin Marsh, FEMA liaison attached to the EPA monitoring detail for the Briar Basin Exclusion Zone. We're not here in any enforcement capacity. We'd just like to talk." I told her the coffee was ready if she wanted it. She looked back at the Suburban. One of the men, older, gray buzz cut, 4 arms like fence posts, gave a small nod. All 3 of them came up. The dogs didn't move from the shade under the porch, but I felt the vibration through the boards under my feet, steady and even. Assessment, not alarm. I should tell you what Briar Basin was before it was a dead zone, because the government version leaves things out, and the internet version gets it wrong. Briar Basin was never a town, exactly. It was a census-designated place, a collection of about 300 people spread across a wide, flat valley between 2 mountain ranges, in the kind of Nevada that even Nevada forgets about. No incorporated government, no mayor, no police. 1 rode in from the south, 1 from the north, both unpaved for the last 30 miles. A post office, a propane exchange. A woman named Darla, who cut hair on Tuesdays. My family had been there since 1931. My grandmother came out from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl and never went back, not because she found prosperity, but because she found silence. 4 generations of us lived on the same 40 acres. I was born in the back bedroom. I learned to read from my mother, and to shoot from my father, and to listen from the land itself, which sounds romantic until you've done it, and then it just sounds like the truth. The government will tell you that Briar Basin was evacuated in 2024 following the detection of anomalous environmental degradation patterns. They'll tell you that soil samples revealed a rapid and unexplained decline in microbial activity across a 200-square-mile area. They'll tell you the water table showed contamination markers that didn't match any known industrial or natural source. They'll tell you it was precautionary. Here is what actually happened. The land started going quiet, not metaphorically, not poetically. I mean the actual, measurable acoustic output of a living landscape. Insects, birds, rodents whined through grass. The faint electrical hum that desert brush gives off in certain weather, all of it began to diminish, not die, diminish. Like someone was turning a dial. I noticed it in April of that year, because April is when the basin usually wakes up. The winter brown gives way, and you get paintbrush, and desert marigold, and the air fills with sound. Except that April, the wildflowers came in but nothing visited them. No bees, no moths at dusk, no hummingbirds. The flowers opened into a silence so total I could hear my own blood moving through my ears. By June, the grass had stopped growing. Not dead, the blades were green, alive, but they stayed the same height week after week, like something had spoken to them and they'd agreed to stop. By August, people started feeling it, not in their bodies, in their attention. I'd be mid-sentence talking to Darla at the post office, and we'd both trail off at the same moment, staring at the same empty point in the middle distance, and then come back without acknowledging it had happened. It was like the valley was asking for something, not demanding, not forcing, just requesting with a patience so vast it didn't need repetition. The first family left in September. They didn't say why. They just loaded a trailer and drove south and didn't come back. Then 2 more families, then 8. By November, the government had arrived with their censors and their acronyms, and by February, they'd drawn the perimeter and called it an exclusion zone and told the remaining 41 residents they were being relocated for their safety. 40 of them went. I did not. I need to be precise about why, because it matters. I was not being stubborn. I was not making a political statement about government overreach. I was not in denial. I stayed because I could feel that the valley had changed, and I could feel that I had changed with it. And I knew with a certainty I have never been able to explain to anyone who wasn't here that the change was not finished, and that leaving before it finished would be worse than staying. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded then. When the FEMA coordinator, a decent man named Pruitt, sat at my kitchen table and told me I had 72 hours to vacate, I watched myself from a small, still distance and understood that I could not make him see what I saw. The valley was not dying. The valley was concentrating. Everything that had seemed like loss, the silence, the cessation, the stillness, was not an ending. It was a collecting, like a breath drawn in so slowly that you only notice the absence of exhale. Pruitt left. The deadline passed. A registered letter arrived by certified mail informing me that my continued presence was my own liability and that emergency services would not enter the exclusion zone on my behalf. I signed the acknowledgement and sent it back and sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the basin and felt, for the first time in my adult life, that I was exactly where something needed me to be. That was 20 months ago. Dr. Marsh and her team sat at my kitchen table, and I poured them coffee, and they looked around my house the way people look around a place they expected to be a ruin. The lights worked. The stove was clean. My bookshelves were organized. The dogs lay quietly by the door, doing their chest purr, and the older man, his name was Briggs, he said, no title offered, watched the dogs for a long time. "Your animals seem healthy," he said. "They are. The survey data from the aerial passes shows no viable mammalian life in the basin outside of this structure." I poured myself coffee and sat down. Define viable. The third person, a younger man named Caro, who hadn't spoken yet, opened a laptop and turned it toward me. Satellite thermal imaging. I recognized the shape of my valley. My house was a white-hot dot near the center. Everything else was uniform, not cold, not lifeless, but even, an unbroken field of identical thermal signature across 200 square miles with no variation for terrain, elevation, water, or structure. "That's not possible," Caro said. "Every landscape has thermal differentiation. Rock absorbs differently than soil. Water reflects differently than sand. This," he tapped the screen, "reads like a single surface, like the entire basin is one material. What material? I asked. He looked at Dr. Marsh. She looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at me. We don't know, he said. That's why we're here. I want to tell you what happened next in the right order, but order is something I've become less certain about. Not in a confused way. In a way that's more like how you stop noticing a clock's ticking, not because you've gone deaf, but because your attention has been invited somewhere wider. Time in the basin doesn't misbehave. It just matters less. Events connect by weight instead of sequence, and some things that happened on the third day of their visit feel like they belong before things that happened on the first. But I'll try to be linear, for your sake, not mine. On the first afternoon, Dr. Marsh asked to take soil samples. I told her she was welcome to. She and Caro went out with their kits, and I watched from the porch. She knelt about 40 yards from the house, drove a sample tube into the earth, and stopped. She stayed kneeling for maybe 90 seconds, not moving, not pulling the tube out. Caro said her name twice. On the third time, she flinched like she'd been woken up, and looked at the tube in her hands as though she'd forgotten what it was. She brought the sample back to the Suburban and put it in their portable analyzer, and the results took 7 minutes. And when they came back, she stood next to the vehicle, staring at the readout without speaking. Caro looked over her shoulder and said a word I couldn't hear. At dinner, I made elk stew from the last of what I'd hunted in the mountains to the west, before the animals stopped being there in the normal way. Dr. Marsh told me the soil was alive. Not in the way soil is usually alive, with bacteria and fungi and nematodes. Those were all absent. But the mineral substrate itself was exhibiting metabolic markers. The silicon and calcium and aluminum were moving sugars, cycling energy, exchanging gases at a rate that didn't make chemical sense unless you accepted that the dirt was breathing. That's not dirt anymore, Briggs said quietly. No, Marsh agreed. It's not. It hasn't been for a while, I told them. I can feel it at night, through the floor. They looked at me. Not a vibration, I said. More like a temperature, like lying on something warm-blooded. Briggs set his fork down and didn't pick it up again. On the second day, Caro set up a grid of acoustic sensors in a 200-meter radius around my house. He was mapping the silence, he said, trying to establish whether the absence of sound was genuine or whether the basin was producing frequencies outside human hearing. By noon, he had his answer. The basin was not silent. It was speaking at 0.7 hertz below hearing, below feeling, in a range where sound stops being sound and becomes something closer to pressure. A single, unbroken tone across every sensor simultaneously, with no point of origin, not coming from anywhere. Coming from everywhere equally. The ground, the air, the mountains, all of it tuned to the same note. It's resonant, Caro said, meaning the frequency was self-reinforcing. It wasn't being generated and projected. It was being maintained, the way a bell maintains its tone, except a bell decays and this didn't. The amplitude was exactly stable, no fluctuation, no drift. Maintained with a precision that implied attention. Caro played a sample at a higher frequency through a speaker, so we could hear a representation of it. It was a low, steady hum, featureless and constant, and when it came through the speaker, the dogs stopped their chest purring, and the house was so still I could hear the filaments in the light bulbs. Turn it off, Briggs said. Caro turned it off. She's been living in that for 20 months, Briggs said to Marsh. Not to me. About me. I watched him calculate something behind his eyes. I know, I said, and before you ask, yes, I know it's in me too. I told them because I was tired of the question being unspoken. I told them what I had not told Pruitt, what I had not included in the certified letter, what I had not written in the journal I kept for the first 6 months, and then stopped keeping, not because I lost interest, but because the language I had was no longer adequate for what I was experiencing. The change is not dramatic. That's what makes it impossible to report. There's no moment of horror, no sharp edge where the normal ends and the wrong begins. It's more like fluency. Like learning a language by immersion, there's no day you don't speak it. There's just a day you realize you've been thinking in it. I feel the basin the way I used to feel weather, not with instruments, with the body. I know when something crosses the perimeter. Not a thought, not a vision, just a shift in the pressure of the hum. The way you know someone has entered a room when your back is turned. I know the patterns of the ground, the way a sailor knows currents. I don't navigate by landmarks anymore. I navigate by density. There are places where the ground is more awake, and my feet avoid or seek them without being told. The dogs changed first. That's how I knew it was real and not psychological. Dogs don't have the cognitive architecture for self-deception. When they stopped barking and started their low chest pulse, that was the land speaking through a new instrument. They're healthier than they've ever been. No parasites, no joint problems, no anxiety. They eat less. They sleep differently, not in the usual dog cycle of nap and wake, but in a long, deep, synchronized stillness that matches the basin's rhythm, and when they come out of it, they know things. Where water is, where the ground is thin, where I should not walk. I know things now too. That's the part I can never say correctly. Not facts, not information. Something more like geometry, a sense of shape, of how things relate in space and time, of what the basin is becoming and how far along it is and what it needs. It needs witnesses. That is the only word I can find that maps onto the knowledge. Not observers, not scientists. Witnesses, in the old sense, people who are present for something and carry the fact of it forward. The basin is becoming something, and the becoming requires that it be seen, not measured, not analyzed, seen. The way you see a person, with the whole self. I think that's why I couldn't leave. I think the basin asked, and the asking felt like my own desire because it came through the same channel, the body, the instinct, the animal knowledge that lives below language. I don't think it lied. I don't think it pretended to be my own will. I think the distinction between its request and my response was never as clean as we want it to be. I think we are built to be asked, and it knew how to ask. I told them all of this over elk stew and bad coffee, and the 0.7 hertz hum that none of us could hear and all of us could feel. Dr. Marsh took notes. Caro recorded audio. Briggs sat still, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I recognized from years of living alone, the look of someone measuring the distance between what they believe and what they're being shown. "You understand," Briggs said when I'd finished, "that what you're describing is consistent with long-term exposure to infrasonic frequency. Behavioral changes, perceptual distortion, emotional attachment to the source of exposure. There's a literature on this." "I know," I said. "I read it before I stopped going online." "Then you know there's a physiological explanation for everything you've just told us." "There's a physiological explanation for falling in love too. Doesn't mean the other person isn't real." He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I, fully. But I meant it. On the third day, Briggs asked to walk the perimeter with me. Just the two of us. Marsh and Caro stayed behind with their instruments, and Briggs and I walked east from the house toward the low ridge that marks the edge of the basin where the old Griswold claim used to be. He was quiet for the first half-mile. Military quiet, not awkward, just gathered. Then he said, without looking at me, "I'm not FEMA." I told him I'd already figured that. "I've been to 6 of these, different locations, different sizes, all within the last 3 years. I stopped walking. He stopped too. 6, 7, counting this one. The first was in Saskatchewan. 40 square kilometers of boreal forest. Same thermal signature, same acoustic baseline. No wildlife, no microbial activity in the soil. Mineral substrate showing metabolic markers. The Canadians called it a dead zone. Evacuated the nearest town. Sent in a survey team. He paused. The survey team stayed for 9 days and 2 of the 5 refused to leave. Refused? One of them, a hydrologist, 43 years old. No history of mental illness, told the extraction team that the forest had asked her to stay, and she had agreed, and she was not in danger, and she was not confused, and if they removed her by force, she would come back. What happened? They removed her by force. She was placed in a facility in Winnipeg for evaluation, released after 14 days with no diagnosis, cognitively intact, no psychosis, no delusional markers. She was calm, cooperative, and consistent in her account. She said the forest was becoming something, and it needed someone present. She used the word witness. I felt the hum shift, not louder, not different in pitch, just attentive, like a dog lifting its head. She went back? I asked. 12 days after release, drove to the perimeter, walked in, and has not been seen since. That was 18 months ago. Aerial thermal shows a second hotspot in the zone now, roughly human-sized, exactly her last known GPS coordinate. We stood there in the warming morning, and I felt the ground under my boots, and the ground felt me back, and neither of us pretended otherwise. You said 7, I said. Saskatchewan, northern Japan, in the interior of Hokkaido, a valley in eastern Turkey, the Jarrah Forest in Western Australia, a stretch of the Pantanal in Brazil, a fjord in northern Norway, and here, all the same acoustic baseline, same thermal uniformity, same soil metabolism, same wildlife absence, same timeline. Each one was noticed within a 6-month window between 2023 and 2024. None of them are growing, which is the good news. None of them are shrinking, which is the other news. And the people? In each one? Briggs looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't expected. Not suspicion, not pity, envy. Each zone has between 1 and 4 people who refused to leave or returned after removal. All cognitively intact. All consistent in their accounts. All report the same experience being asked, not compelled. All use similar language, witness, presence, becoming. So I'm not the only one. You're not the only one. And you're here to what? Study me? Remove me? Document the pattern? He picked up a handful of dirt and held it loosely in his palm. I watched the soil move against his skin, very slightly, like iron filings near a magnet, orienting toward the center of his hand. I've spent 2 years writing reports that no one at any level of any government wants to read, he said. The reports say the same thing every time. The zones are alive, they're aware, they're stable, they're not hostile, and they want people present, not to consume them or convert them, but to be known by them. Every agency I've reported to has responded the same way: contain, monitor, deny. Not because they think I'm wrong, because they don't have a framework for something that isn't a threat, and isn't a resource, and isn't ignorable. He opened his hand. The soil stayed in his palm for a half-second after his fingers spread, then fell. I'm here, he said, because I'm running out of time to be the person who writes the reports, and I wanted to talk to someone who chose to stay. We walked back to the house in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The hum was steady. The dogs met us at the property line and walked beside us, and their chest pulses matched our footsteps. That night, Marsh and Caro ran a new experiment. They placed a sealed container of sterilized sand inside the perimeter, 50 meters from the house, and a control container outside the perimeter, a mile south. They'd check both in 24 hours. But before that, before the experiment, before bed, before any of what followed, something happened during dinner that I need to describe carefully, because it's the part I understand least, and it's the part that matters most. We were sitting on the porch. The evening was warm, and the basin was doing what it does at dusk, which is something I've never successfully described. The quality of the light changes. Not the color, not the angle, the quality, as if the photons themselves are arriving with more purpose. Every edge sharpens. The distance between objects becomes legible in a way it isn't during the day, like depth perception suddenly gains an extra dimension. The first time it happened, I stood on this porch and cried, not from fear or sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of being inside something beautiful that was looking at me with the same attention I was giving it. Marsh saw it happen. I watched her face. She was mid-sentence, saying something about mineral uptake rates, and she stopped. Her eyes went wide. Not with fear, with recognition. The same expression you see on a person's face when a piece of music reaches them, not the ears, them, the part underneath language. "Oh," she said. Caro didn't see it. He was looking at his laptop. Briggs saw it, but he'd seen it before. He watched Marsh the way a doctor watches a patient receive a diagnosis, not the information, but the reorganization of the self around the information. "It's real," Marsh said quietly. "Yes," I said. This isn't contamination. It's not exposure. I know. It's looking at me." "Yes." She sat very still for a long time. Then she said, "Can it hear me? It's not ears. It's not hearing. But yes, in the way that matters, yes." She didn't say anything to it. She didn't need to. I could feel the hum shift, the faintest modulation, like a held note bending toward a harmony. The basin was acknowledging her, not recruiting her, not seducing her, acknowledging her the way the ground acknowledges weight automatically, structurally, because that is what ground does when something real stands on it. Caro looked up from his laptop. The acoustic sensors are showing something. The 0.7 hertz tone just developed a secondary frequency. "What frequency?" Briggs asked. 0.7 hertz. Identical, but offset by, hold on, he typed. Offset by exactly 1 Planck time. "That's not a meaningful offset," Marsh said. "That's not measurable with these instruments." "I know," Caro said, "but the software is reporting 2 distinct signals where there was 1. Same frequency, same amplitude, theoretically simultaneous, but registering as sequential at the smallest possible interval." Briggs leaned forward. "A canon." "What?" "In music. The same melody played by 2 voices, one starting an instant after the other. It's how you turn a single line into a harmony." We listened. We couldn't hear it, but I could feel it for the first time since I'd been here. The hum was not singular. There were 2 voices in the ground, and one of them had just started. Marsh was shaking. Not from cold. "That second frequency started when she noticed," Caro said, pointing at Marsh. "I have the timestamp. The acoustic shift corresponds to within 2 seconds of when she stopped talking." "It's not reacting to her attention," I said. "It's including her." On the 4th morning, Caro checked the sand experiment. The sterilized container inside the perimeter was unchanged, still sterile sand, no metabolic markers, no bacterial growth, nothing. The control container outside the perimeter was also unchanged. Both were identical. He was confused. He'd expected the interior sample to be colonized or converted. The whole point was to demonstrate that the basin's living soil was infectious, transmissible, actively spreading. "It's not a contaminant," I told him. "It doesn't spread to things. It doesn't colonize." "Then what does it do?" "It became. The soil that's here didn't get infected. It was here when the change happened, and it changed with the basin because it was already part of the basin. Your sterile sand is just sterile sand. It's not from here. The basin doesn't want to make more of itself. It wants to be itself, completely, and be known for what it is." Caro looked at me with the expression I was used to, the one that says this person has been out here too long. But Briggs was nodding. "That matches Saskatchewan," Briggs said. "They tried to provoke expansion for 8 months, introduced organic material, inorganic material, water, even animals at the perimeter. Nothing was absorbed, nothing was changed. The zone has been exactly the same size since the day it was discovered." "So it's not growing," Caro said. "It's not spreading. It's not contaminating. What is it doing?" "Finishing," I said. "On the 5th day, Dr. Marsh asked me to take her to the center. Not the center of my property, the center of the basin. I knew where it was the way I knew where my own heart was, not by measurement, but by orientation. Everything in the basin arranged itself around a point 7 miles northwest of my house, in a dry flat between 2 low hills where nothing had ever been built and nothing had ever happened. And the ground was, even before the change, a kind of ground that discouraged walking. Not dangerous, just purposeless, the kind of place your path curves around without your deciding. I told her it was a long walk, and she'd feel it." "Feel what?" "The closer you get to the center, the more present the basin becomes. It's not louder, it's not stronger, it's more articulate. Like moving from the back of a room toward a person who's been speaking the whole time. The words don't get louder, they get clearer." She wanted to go. Briggs wanted to go. Caro wanted to stay with the instruments. That was fine. I think the basin preferred it that way, though preferred is a word I use loosely. The basin doesn't prefer the way a mind prefers. It prefers the way water prefers downhill structurally, inevitably, without deliberation. We left at dawn. The dogs came. They walked ahead, not scouting, but processing. Their purring shifted constantly, reading the terrain the way a person reads a face, adjusting to nuances I was only beginning to learn. The first 2 miles were indistinguishable from any desert walk. Dry air, flat ground, sage and rock. But by mile 3, the quality of the air changed. Not temperature, not humidity, density. Each breath felt like it contained more. Not more oxygen, more information. I don't know how else to say it. The air tasted like it knew something. Marsh felt it. I saw her breathing change, saw her steps slow, not from fatigue but from attention. She was listening with her whole body. "It's not just the ground," she said. "The air is part of it. Everything here is part of it. The ground, the air, the light, the water in the aquifer below us. It's one system, one metabolism, one organism. I don't know if organism is right. Organism implies a boundary, an inside and an outside. I don't think it has an outside." By mile 5, Briggs had stopped talking entirely. He walked with his hands open at his sides, palms out, like a man wading through water he was trying to feel. His face had lost the military composure. He looked younger. He looked like someone remembering something. "This is further than anyone has gone in any of the other zones," he said. "The ones who stayed, they stay near the edges, near their homes. No one has gone to the center." "No one was invited," I said. He looked at me sharply. "You were invited?" Not in words, not in a voice. but the same way I was invited to stay the knowing. I've known for about 3 months that there's something at the center it wants me to see. I've been waiting. For what? For other witnesses. At mile 7, the dogs stopped and sat, all 3 of them, simultaneously, facing the same direction. Their purring was a single tone now, all 3 chests vibrating in unison, and the tone was the same as the basin's hum. They were part of the instrument. The center of the basin looked like nothing. I need you to understand this. It was the most important place I have ever stood, and it looked like absolutely nothing. Flat ground, dry soil, small rocks, no feature, no marking, no structure, no discoloration. If you'd walked here before the change, you would have kept walking. There was nothing to stop for. But standing there, in the hum, in the density of the air, in the late morning light that fell with that quality of purpose I'd come to recognize standing there, I could feel it. Below us. Not deep, maybe 20 feet down. Not a thing. Not an object. A point. A place where the basin's awareness was most concentrated, where the hum originated not as sound but as intention, where the living mineral soil had organized itself around something that I cannot call a brain or a heart or a mind, because none of those words belong to this, but that functioned as the place where the basin knew itself. It was aware of us. It had been aware of us since we entered the zone. Since before that, since the dogs told me they were coming. But here, at the center, the awareness was mutual and equal and undeniable. This was not ambiguous. This was not infrasonic suggestion. This was standing in the presence of something alive that was not an animal and not a plant and not a machine and not a god, and feeling it look back. Marsh was crying. Silently, not distressed. The way you cry when something you've spent your life trying to measure suddenly exceeds measurement, and you realize the tools were never the point. Briggs was on his knees, not worshipping, just lowering himself, getting closer to the ground, putting his hands flat on the soil, pressing down, the way you press your hand against a window when someone you know is on the other side. "It's warm," he said. "Yes. It's not geothermal. No. It's body heat. Yes. The whole basin. Yes. The whole basin is its body, and we're standing on its sternum. I don't know how long we stayed. Time is thin at the center, not absent but transparent. Like looking through clean water to the bottom of a pool, you can see the surface and the depth at the same time, and neither one is more real. The sun moved. We didn't. What I can tell you is what happened when I finally spoke to it. Not out loud, not in language. I spoke to it the way the dog spoke with the body, with the rhythm of my breathing, with the pattern of my weight on the ground, with the electrical fact of my living nervous system pressing against its living mineral surface. I asked it the question I'd been carrying for 20 months. What are you becoming? And it answered. Not in words, not in images, in the only language it had, which was the language of what it was. It showed me itself, the way a landscape shows itself when you stand on a high point and turn in a slow circle, not telling, not explaining, just being visible. I saw the basin, all of it at once, not from above, from within. The network of living mineral that stretched from the surface to the bedrock, every grain connected to every other grain, every molecule cycling energy in a pattern so complex it made weather look simple. I saw the 7 zones: Saskatchewan, Hokkaido, Turkey, Australia, Brazil, Norway, Nevada, and I understood that they were not separate, they were not even connected. They were the same. One organism, if you need that word, with 7 points of surfacing. the way a single root system might send up 7 trees. And I saw what it was becoming, and it was so simple that I almost laughed. It was becoming visible, not emerging, not erupting, not conquering, visible. It had always been here, not recently, not since 2023, but always since the mineral substrate of the Earth's crust first cooled into solid ground. It was the ground, not a thing in the ground, not a thing that colonized the ground. The ground itself, the mineral foundation of the planet, had always been alive in this way, and it had always been aware, and it had spent 4 billion years in a patience so absolute that it made geological time look hasty. It had not been asleep. It had been polite. It had kept quiet because the things living on its surface were loud and busy and small and beautiful, and it had watched them with an attention so gentle that nothing ever felt observed. But something had changed, not in it, in us. We had become capable of noticing. Our instruments had become sensitive enough, our awareness had become wide enough, our loneliness had become deep enough that we could, for the first time in the history of life on this planet, feel the ground looking back. And once we could feel it, it could not, in good conscience, keep pretending. The 7 zones were not wounds or infections or invasions, they were introductions. Careful, slow, deliberately limited introductions in remote places, with small populations, where the revelation could be. I felt it search for a word, and I gave it one practiced, where a few people at a time could stand on the warm ground and feel the attention and learn that they had never, not for 1 second of their lives, been standing on something dead. I came back to my body, on the flat ground, at the center of the basin, and Marsh was looking at me, and I could see in her face that she'd received something too. Not the same thing, not the same depth, but enough. Enough to know. It's not a dead zone, she said. No, it's the opposite. Yes, it's the most alive place on Earth. It's just alive in a way we didn't have a category for. Briggs stood up. His knees were dusty. His eyes were red. He was smiling in a way I hadn't seen on his face and probably hadn't been there in years. Well, he said, that's going to be a hell of a report. We walked back to my house. 7 miles across living ground, under purposeful light, through air that tasted like knowledge. The dogs walked among us, and their purring was contented and steady and matched the hum. When we reached the house, Caro was standing by the Suburban with a look on his face that I recognized, the look of someone who has been alone with instruments that are telling him something his training cannot accommodate. The secondary acoustic frequency, he said. It's not secondary anymore. There are 7 tones now. 7 distinct signals at 0.7 hertz, each offset from the next by 1 Planck interval. They started appearing one by one over the last 4 hours. 7 tones, 7 zones. It's singing, Caro said, and his voice broke slightly on the word. The whole basin is singing, and it's harmonizing with something I can't see. Not something you can't see, I told him. Something you haven't stood on yet. He looked at the ground, at his feet, at the soil he'd been testing and sampling and analyzing for 5 days. And I watched his face change the way Marsh's had changed the night before, not learning something new, but recognizing something that had always been true and had simply been waiting, with inhuman patience, for him to be ready. Dr. Marsh's team stayed for 12 days total. They collected their data. They ran their tests. They did their jobs, because that is what they came to do, and the basin did not object to measurement. It simply exceeded it. On the 9th day, Marsh asked me the question I'd been expecting. Do you think it's safe, genuinely safe? I considered this honestly, the way I've considered everything honestly, since the Valley taught me that honesty is not a virtue, but a physics, a way of aligning your surface with your structure, so that nothing is wasted in the gap. I don't think safe is the right framework, I said. I think safe assumes that the baseline condition is danger and that good things are the absence of threat. I think the basin is something else. I think it's the presence of something we don't have a name for. And the question isn't whether it's safe, but whether we're capable of being in the presence of something real without needing it to be safe first. That's not going to satisfy a committee. No, it won't. On the 12th morning, they packed the Suburban. Caro had filled 6 hard drives with data that would, I knew, be interpreted 17 different ways by 17 different agencies and ultimately used to justify whatever decision had already been made. Marsh had a personal audio journal she'd recorded each night that she told me she wasn't sure she'd submit with the official report. Briggs had what he'd always had, another story to add to his collection, another witness confirming the pattern, another report that would be filed and ignored until the day it couldn't be. Marsh hugged me before she got in the vehicle. I can't remember the last time someone touched me, and I felt the full, human weight of it, not the basin's warmth, not the hum's presence, but the simple, mammalian fact of another person's arms. I held on longer than I should have. "Will you come back?" I asked. "I don't know. I want to." "That's the basin talking," Caro said from the passenger seat, trying to be light, trying to rebuild the scaffolding of skepticism that had been dismantled in him piece by piece over 12 days. "Maybe," Marsh said. "Or maybe it's me, and I just didn't know I could feel this way about a place." "That's exactly what it would want you to think," Caro said. "Yes," I agreed. "And that's exactly what would be true if it were real. That's the problem. Those two things feel the same because they might be the same." They drove south. I watched the dust until it was gone. The dogs sat with me, and their purring was slow and deep, and I felt the basin settle back into its singular patience, its long attention, its impossible courtesy. That was 5 months ago. I'm telling you this now because the zones are becoming visible in a way that can no longer be managed with perimeters and exclusion orders. The thermal anomalies are detectable by commercial satellite. The acoustic signatures are appearing in seismological databases worldwide. A graduate student in Osaka published a paper 3 weeks ago identifying the 7-tone harmonic pattern, and the internet has not stopped talking about it since. The framework is about to break. The story that these are dead zones, contaminated, dangerous, lifeless, is about to collapse under the weight of what they actually are, and when it does, people will have to decide how they feel about living on a planet that is, and has always been, alive in a way they never imagined. I don't know what that will look like. I don't know if people will come here or stay away. I don't know if governments will open the zones or reinforce the perimeters. I don't know if Marsh will submit her real report or the edited one. I don't know if Briggs will be believed or reassigned. I know what I know. I know the ground is warm. I know the hum is constant. I know the dogs are calm and healthy and tuned to a frequency that feels like belonging. I know the basin sees me, and I see it, and neither of us looks away. I know that the thing they told you was dead is the most alive thing you have ever stood on, and it has been waiting for you. You, specifically, the one reading this with a patience that makes love look impulsive. I know I should be frightened. Everything in my training, my education, my cultural inheritance tells me that something vast and incomprehensible looking at me should trigger fear. And I felt that fear in the early months. I felt it, and I sat with it, and I let it run its course, and when it was finished, what was left underneath was not comfort or peace or surrender. It was recognition. The quiet at the center of the basin is not silence. It is the sound of something so large It doesn't need to be loud. And the warmth under my feet is not geothermal and not metabolic and not any word that fits inside a textbook. It is the body temperature of the world, finally felt. Come if you want to. Stay away if you need to. But stop calling it dead. Stop drawing perimeters around the places where the planet is trying to introduce itself and declaring them hazardous. The ground is alive. It always was. It's just that now, for the first time, it's sure that we're ready to know. And it's watching not to see what we do,